All right. Hello, welcome to today's lunch break. I'm Carrie. Today we're talking with Kate Schwarting. Kate is an interdisciplinary artist from New York. She combines traditional and new media to explore the intersection of art and science with an emphasis on time, process, and interactivity. Kate works at Gallery North on Long Island and is also the programs manager and board secretary at SciArt Initiative. Her work appeared in our SUBMERGED exhibit. We're so happy to have her with us today. And if listeners, you have any questions throughout the talk, you can type those into the Q&A box and we'll be getting to those at the end. To start off, Kate, can you tell us about the mediums and subjects that you use in your work?
Absolutely. Thank you so much again to SciArt for having me on today. My medium kind of ranges depending on the subjects that I'm working with and the things I'm trying to explain or bring out from different subjects related to art, science and art. I try to view the big picture in my work. Some of my series relate to astronomy, geology, biology, and I'm trying to make the connections between how we as humans relate to science emotionally, what our impact is on nature, as well as nature's impact on us. Some of the main questions that I focus on when I'm starting a series of work is, what do we know? What are the limits of our knowledge? What are the facts that we have, and what do we still need to figure out and want to understand about the world around us? I'm also very interested in the role and process of the researcher. So both as a scientific researcher trying to uncover new facts and understand the world, as well as an artist trying to negotiate new mediums and research their interactions. And I try to take on my work as a process of discovery for the viewer. I want to make stages of depth in the work that you can approach it from a distance and see and enjoy it from an artistic perspective, but then spend more time with it, get up close to it, and start to uncover other layers of knowing it, that you can approach it with little to no knowledge of science and enjoy it, as well as having some understanding and coming at it from a different perspective. So two of the main themes that I've taken on were the marine microbiome and the human microbiome. Diatoms and radiolurans I discovered when I was studying geology years ago, and I found them fascinating because of these tiny microscopic plankton and organisms that you can find in wetlands and in the ocean, and they are found, their fossilized skeletons are found in rocks, and a lot of geologists use them for understanding past climates. But also the ones that are alive right now are really important for us understanding how our climate is impacted by our own impact on it, but then understanding just our environmental changes. So as an artist, I found that using pen and ink and kind of going back to how traditional illustrators worked was a good way to start, but this is a picture of them. I wanted to project how many of these organisms existed in the rocks, that when a geologist would look at the fossils, you might uncover one or two, but the kind of shells and the fossilized versions of them tend to degrade over time chemically. And so you'll have thousands and thousands of these that have accumulated in one place that'll make up a rock that looks like any other, gray, ordinary object. But there's actually millions of these things that have condensed to form that. So I studied a lot of these organisms through research online and understanding their shapes and everything, and creating kind of my own language for them, and then projected them onto geological strata and used those forms to create the strata. And did this while using a hand lens to get very close and make very tiny details. And so this is another view of one of the pieces. And when you again, when you view it from further back, you only see the strata. You have to get up close. I usually ask viewers to try to use the hand lens too, to kind of getting close to it. And you also start to get an idea of the fibers of the paper. So it has a back and forth between the medium and the scientific element to it. And this is another view of it. And I also was interested in kind of the remnants of things that are left behind. So this is a digital rendering of the paper with the drawing actually removed from it. So it just leaves these halos. And to me, it's very reminiscent of how the fossils are left behind. And this is a little book piece that I did based on this concept of using the radiolorans and the diatoms to understand geological strata. So this is a book that's in the museum in Alexandria, Egypt. It's a shell with each page representing a small chunk of the geological record for a place. And the different colored papers represent different types of sedimentary processes and fossilization processes. And they are all separated so that you can organize the pages as you think they would make sense. And it allows the viewer / reader to kind of take it on as if they were someone trying to do research and understand it the same way someone might do in the field. And these are the pages up close. So you can see in here the medium, I've got pen and ink, but then I've also done the silhouette pieces. I've also portrayed these through videos with watercolors. This is just a still from it, trying to take multiple mediums and integrate them with one another. This is another piece where I've taken digital elements of the original drawings as well as watercolor pieces and overlaid them in videos. This is an installation I did based on the same subject with these laser cut kind of puppet versions of the diatoms and the microbes that existed in the space for about a month, and over time the puppets would fall, and it was supposed to represent the death of these organisms. So these were all attached to little motors, basically, with projections in the back. And for the human microbiome and our own internal microbes that play a role in our life, I started again with the pen and ink. This is kind of a good view of something that's kind of abstract from the further away, but it was based on the shape of the human gastrointestinal tract, looking through it. And it's made up entirely of tiny drawings of bacteria. So I usually tend to start with pen and ink for any series, and then slowly work into more complex mediums as I go along. And these are a lot of the pen and inks. This one so far has stayed mostly in drawing, but I did get into some digital versions of them. This is another pen and ink, and also starting to expand. I usually subtract all of the excess information from the work other than the microbes and that one thing. But here I started to use the black negative space to bring in some of the other surrounding elements. And this is a cross section of the colon. And this is another piece I did related to that, also pen and ink, but relating multiple sections and playing with the idea of a cross section. And this piece, I started to get into painting and pulling color back into the work and experimenting with how I could portray these millions and millions of bacteria that make up our GI tract and play a large role in our life. I can make up something that's such a monumental number that exists in one place in a piece of artwork, and bring in elements of design and composition to it. So those are the main mediums and pieces that I work on.
Great. Thank you so much for that overview. And what have you been working on recently?
So recently I've set aside those two series for the most part, and I've gotten into doing my own kind of experimentation with looking through a microscope. So with my other pieces, I was trained in geology, and I did a lot of research on geology when I was in college. But I wanted to really observe more of these things firsthand now that I've been working on my own for a number of years. So I have my own microscope now at home in my studio, and I've been working on trying to integrate more of the things that I've seen firsthand and come in contact with in firsthand. This is a photograph of pollen that I took from my garden from a morning glory flower that I was growing. And I find some of these compositions interesting. They're not completely representational of how they look, because you have the elements of the microscope that kind of mess with them a bit, making them blurry in certain ways, but I find that an interesting way of playing with the image. This was a bee's wing. So right now, a lot of my work is based on the research side of things and experimenting with what I can find. This is another flower. This is a marigold flower, and finding some of these interesting textures that you get when you look at something under a microscope that you would have no idea existed beforehand by just looking at it. I'm just going to go back. And also right now I've been looking a lot at local pond water. I don't have any images of these in here, but one of my main focuses right now is starting to develop some work based on local findings. Aside from that, the other work that I've been doing through Gallery North is I've been trying to really promote being able to see what artists are doing in their studio, because to me that's almost akin to working in a lab. It's so fascinating to me to see what's backstage and what they're experimenting with and how they are creating. So I've created a virtual artist tour of studios that I do once a week on Saturdays. So far we've been doing local artists on Long Island in New York, where I'm from, and spending an hour with them to understand what they do and how they do it, what materials they use, and what their process is. And the other thing that goes along with that is that I've been hosting virtual, we call it Coffee and Crit. It's allowing artists to come on Monday afternoons at 4 o'clock through Zoom and share what they're working on. And it's open to absolutely everyone. And you just bring something. It's very informal. Everyone goes around and gives a little thing about what they're doing. And it helps give that sense of community to artists right now that are struggling so much and don't have the opportunity to necessarily go to a gallery or show their work in a gallery, or working in silence and need that sense of togetherness and input from other artists.
That's great. Those are wonderful platforms, especially for this time. Will there be a tour of your studio on there?
There hasn't been yet. I've been asked to do one. Hopefully at some point. My studio is very small, but yeah, it might happen sometime soon. I know right now we're booked on studio tours all the way through, but I do show my studio a lot on Coffee and Crit, which that's where I've been showing a lot of my work right now, actually, as is through that platform, and to be able to experiment with that.
Great. And are there any other ways that we can keep up with what you're doing right now?
Coming soon, I will be doing like an online course or kind of free open experimentation Zoom meetings. So you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and I'll hopefully be announcing that soon. But being able to have collaboration with other artists and allowing you guys to kind of step into my studio and experiment along with me is what I'm hoping to launch soon.
Great. We have some questions in from the audience. There's still time if you have more questions to write those in. I think Julia's going to jump in now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate. It's really great to see kind of the summary of your work and how your different series relate to each other. So a couple of questions. One of our audience members noticed that a lot of your work that you showed at the beginning of your talk was very monochromatic, and this audience member was wondering, what draws you to that kind of black and white, that stark contrast type of style, as opposed to, you're using micron pens. You could have used, colored pens or brought color in there, but why do you think you made that decision for those series in particular?
When I've worked with pen, I've always gone back to the black and white. I've experimented a little bit with color. Definitely for the bacteria pieces, I attempted a number of versions with different colors, different colored pens, different colored paints. It never felt right to me. I think most of those pieces, especially the big ones, something that's important to me is stripping away all the other information that I think isn't necessary to me. And the main concept to me is just really showing the amount and the variety of these different organisms. And to get that kind of abstraction that I want, it's been important to keep it black and white, although as I kind of mentioned towards the end, the place that I want to go, at least with the human microbiome, is to create pieces that have more color in it, to get more of the idea of the amount of the different species of them, because many of them have exactly the same shape, and yet they're completely have completely different functions and everything. So but I've mainly chosen paint to do that with, because you can get so many more subtleties with that than I found you could get with a pen.
That's interesting. Yeah, about their shape being the same, but they're totally different. So you, of course, you have to bring in color to make that differentiation.
Yes, yeah. I have a very large painting that I don't have in here that I've been working on for about 3 years now. And every so often I go back to it. And it may take another like 10 years to get done because it's huge and I have tons of painted tiny bacteria, but it's been taking a long time to get the color just right, to get it across the right way.
That's so funny. Well, you'll have to show us when you're done with it.
Someday it will be finished.
Another question about your microscope. Do you have advice for people who are interested in working from microscopy images or getting their own microscope? What kind of microscope do you have? That whole world of microscopes. As an artist, how do you get one? What makes a microscope a good one, at least for artistic purposes?
Yeah, for me, obviously as an artist, I don't know as much about as microscopes as I'd like to. So I got a fairly basic one off of Amazon, but there are a number of different ways you can go about it. There are even things you can get online that are clip-ons for your phone. So that's been really helpful to me. There are clip-on like lenses you can get. They're relatively cheap, but they actually had a pretty good level of magnification, at least to get to the level of doing like macro photography. So that'll give you a little bit more detail than you would have normally. Those are the least expensive way to go. The microscope I have is actually right behind here. I don't know what version it is. Let me see if I can see without destroying everything. So this is the microscope that I have. It's an Omax, and hopefully I'm not pronouncing that wrong as a non-science person with this. But I have a clip-on adapter that allows me to take photographs through the eyepiece. It also allows me to do video and everything else through it, which is really handy. And this works well. I've used it also with astronomy and attached it to telescopes as well to take images through there.
Very cool. That's great. All right, well, that is all the time that we have for questions. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us. And I'm excited to see that big painting when it's done.
Yes, someday it will be shown. And the one great thing with that piece was that I actually went and spoke to researchers in their lab about the colors and things. So someday that will be presented in completion.
Great.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kate. Thanks to everyone who listened. Hopefully we'll all go look at Gallery North and the events that they're putting on. Our next lunch break is Wednesday the 6th at 1 p.m. with Steve Singapore. And you can join our mailing list at SciArtInitiative.org to stay up to date on what we're doing next. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.